could ask everybody to please find seats at this time. If I could ask everybody to please find seats at this time.
I don't know. Maybe
Excuse me, at this time, I would kindly ask that if we could all find seats. I have to get them seated. At this time, I kindly ask everybody to rise for the family.
Service, your husband, your father, your brother, the first reciting blessing that affirms that even though we don't understand the mystery of God's ways, we still turn for guidance and strength at this time. Even though you affirm your belief in God and seem to believe so dearly, nevertheless, you still express your anguish and grief at the loss of your father by rending the article of clothing, which is called kriya. So we're going to make a tear in your garment. Then we'll recite the blessing together in Hebrew and English. We ask everyone here to answer Amen to the blessing in terms of the stand with the family during this time. Could I ask everyone to please turn off your cell phones or silence them at this time? We begin the service today for Senator Joseph Lieberman by first turning to the book of Psalms. King David in his life experienced moments of great joy and moments of sadness, and we utilize the words of Tehillim to give strength and direction. It's my honor to call upon Rabbi David Zirkin of the Riverdale Jewish Center, where Senator Lieberman and Hadassah lived in recent years, to recite Psalm number 1 that speaks about a person of integrity, certainly emblematic of the senator's life. We'll recite the psalm in Hebrew and then in English.
Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzas risha'im u'v'derech hata'im lo amad u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav ki im b'soras Adonai chevtzo u'v'soraso yegeh yomam v'layla v'haya ke'et shasul al pal gemayim asher piryo yitain bi'ito v'yoleu lo yibol v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach lochein harisha'im ki im kamot asher tidfenu ruach al kein lo yakumu risha'im b'mishpat v'chata'im ba'das tzadikim ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech risha'im toved. Happy is one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Rather, that one's delight is in the Torah of the Lord, meditating in God's Torah day and night, and will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, whose leaf will not wither, and whatever that one does prospers. Not so the wicked, or like the chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not survive judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord loves the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed.
Now going to recite Psalm 23, and after I recite it in Hebrew, please join me in its recitation in English. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai roi lo echzar. Inos dashe yarvitzeni. Ame menuchos yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev. Nadcheni b'maglei tzedek. L'man shemo. Gam ki elech. B'gates al-maves lo irara. Ki ata imadi. Shiftecha u'mishantecha. Hema yinachamuni. Taroch l'fanai shulchan neged sorai. Dishanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed. Yudefuni kol yimei chayai. V'shabtu v'eis Adonai. Liorech yamim. Please join me as we recite Psalm 23 together in English. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. And let us say, Amen. Judaism teaches us that Joe, the senator's neshama, his soul, is very much present at this time. The body is just a vessel. His soul is eternal. And it's our responsibility to offer our hakarat hatov, our gratitude for what he brought to our life, so that his light can continue to be a source of blessing for all of us. He will hear the words that we share today, and it serves as a source of inspiration and strength as he makes the journey from this world to the next. We have a number of dignitaries who are here today who will be speaking, who are close to the senator. First, our Governor, Ned Lamont, who will be followed by Senator Richard Blumenthal, Senator Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Dodd, and then former Vice President Al Gore. I'd like to ask Governor Ned Lamont to come forward.
Good morning, everybody. Your friendship with Joe Lieberman started in different ways. Mine started on sort of an inauspicious note. We had a year-long debate all over the state of Connecticut on an issue we both cared deeply about. And I got to say at the end of that year to the Lieberman grandchildren, I have more respect for your grandfather, his integrity and what he stood for, faith and family. I say to Hadassah and the family, thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor. It says a lot about Joe and Hadassah and the family. A lot of you go back with Joe a lot longer than I did. I see Dick Blumenthal is going to be speaking. You know, Dick had some pretty big shoes to fill when he took over as Attorney General when Joe moved on to the Senate. And Chris Murphy is there. You know, I think he's on Joe Lieberman's desk down there in the Senate and following that proud tradition. And of course, Chris Dodd. Chris and Joe were like that for close to a generation, fighting on behalf of families and fighting on behalf of Connecticut values. That was a team. That was a team. There's one other person that I'd like to speak on behalf of, just because he told me a story that goes further back. His name is Marty Looney. Marty Looney is the president of our state Senate. But going back a generation ago, Marty was a young staffer in Yale City Hall, where he actually had to report up to the chief of staff to the mayor, who was Rosa DeLauro. We're a small state. And one day, Marty says he got a call from the majority leader in the state Senate. That was Joe Lieberman. And Joe goes, Marty, I need you to help out somebody. It's going to make a big difference. You do so, you'll always be remembered in the book that counts, and you'll be listed as a mensch. Always be listed in the book that counts, listed as a mensch. And Marty took that to heart and what that meant. You know, from there, Joe Lieberman, as you maybe know, moved on to Attorney General, which is a bit of a backwater job back then, and it was not when he was there. He was an activist, standing up for civil rights, civil liberties, consumer rights, and the environment. And from there, he moved on to the Senate, where probably he was the leader when it came to making sure that a generation later our water is cleaner and our air is purer. Second only probably to Al Gore, who's here you get a chance to talk to as well. And that Gore-Lieberman ticket was an amazing ticket back in the year 2000. What a team they were. I've had a chance to talk to some of the campaign staff on the vice president's bus. It was a little tricky. You know, a lot of WASP. They didn't always know the Orthodox traditions. A little shaky on the Sabbath. I had to work out the scheduling sometime on Friday evenings and Saturdays. Maybe in rural Utah. It was a little tougher to get the appropriate meals. But I also heard one other story, that on the way back from those long campaign trips, Joe Lieberman's campaign caravan would always stop at the flower shop and bring some fresh flowers to Hadassah. And I think Joe hoped that some of the young fathers on the campaign team were there to take notice. At the end of all these campaigns, Vinnie Morrow points out that Joe would always go to Wright Senior Center in New Haven, and he loved to sing Frank Sinatra tunes. And you can imagine his favorite was, "I Did It My Way." He did it his way. He never quite fit in that Republican or Democratic box. I think maybe in an odd way I helped liberate him, because when he beat me pretty good, by the way, and he won as an independent. He's been a proud independent ever since. And he was always a calming presence. I like to think of him as that bridge over troubled waters, as you see the partisans sniping from both directions. And I last got to see the senator at the Alfalfa Club. And we got together, and like old guys, we put on the rose-colored glasses, remember the good old days. And he also said, I think, Governor, there's one war we can agree on. Let's work together in making sure America stands up and helps the Ukrainian freedom fighters. And I said, Senator, let's do that together. Let's get together. And I never would have thought that we'd be getting together here and now so soon. It was just 4 or 5 days ago that Hadassah made some poached salmon for her husband, and then suddenly he was gone. But he's not gone, because I know he'll always be remembered in that book where it counts, and always listed as a mensch. God bless Joe Lieberman.
Good morning, everyone. We're gathered in a place that made Joe Lieberman who he was and what he was. This synagogue, his home, just a few blocks from here, Stanford High School, a world within a radius of just a few blocks. And no matter how far he went or how high he went, this place was always with him. In the synagogue, he studied Torah and learned to be in the world, but not totally of the world. He worked with Rabbi Aaron Krantz as his mentor. At Stanford High School, he learned the first lessons of leadership in a diverse student body that elected him class president. But most important, in his childhood home with Marcia and Henry Lieberman, he absorbed the principles and values of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, giving back, public service, that became the animating force of his life. I came to know Henry and Marcia and Uncle Ben and Aunt Faye, Minnie, the constellation of people, grandparents, relatives. They were a force. They were a powerful force that made him ferociously independent and strong-willed, strong-minded, but eager to learn from and listen to others. They inculcated the value of bringing people together, bridging gaps, and healing divides. He loved Stanford. When I met him over many occasions, it was usually down the block at the diner. for a cup of coffee. He loved this place because it gave his family a home, a family of immigrants, his grandparents coming to this country. Stanford made them feel welcome and at home and opened a world to them, a world that later opened even more when he was the nation's first Jewish candidate for vice president on a national ticket. Thank you, Al Gore, for making it possible for him to stand at that podium and to say, only in America. He believed in the American dream more than any particular issue or position. I succeeded Joe Lieberman in a number of different jobs in the state Senate, then as Attorney General, and the United States Senate. The 2 years that we overlapped as colleagues in Washington were a master class in bipartisan persuasion and legislating. With Senator John Breaux of Louisiana, he formed the Kosher Cajun Caucus. And he invited colleagues to partake of their recipes. He traveled the world with John McCain. I traveled with John as well, and he often joked that he loved traveling with Joe because he usually had Saturday mornings off when Joe went to synagogue. Joe loved to tell the story of a friend of his who said after Joe was elected to the United States Senate to succeed Lowell Weicker, and I was elected to succeed Joe as State Attorney General, that his friend told him that Connecticut was lucky to have a better U.S. Senator and a better Attorney General. I'm not sure he believed it. Joe, as we all know, had enormous, momentous accomplishments. Among them, he helped form the Department of Homeland Security, and he built the modern intelligence community, a structure which has protected our nation from terrorist threats and attacks both from within and without. He championed civil rights and voting rights, women's reproductive freedom, LGBTQ liberties and protection. But the greatest accomplishment of his life was his marriage to Hadassah and their children and grandchildren. In all the conversations I had with Joe, we would talk about our children, and his face would alight with joy and pride. And that's what I will always remember most about Joe. Of all the great forces in Joe's life, Hadassah was the greatest. And I recall talking to Matt and Etan, the marriage that took place here, which many of us attended, a time of such great joy. Over the years, I watched Joe disagree with colleagues, disagree with me, but as the saying goes, he was never, ever disagreeable. He had a gift for differing, but never dividing. And when he and I differed, we ended our conversations with a smile, because he believed in listening. He truly believed in civility and listening. And what I will remember about Joe, and the picture always in my mind, will be of him listening to someone, because he believed that Every person has a story, and every story is worthy of respect. Sadly, his story ended too soon, and we will miss him.
Good morning. I have a sense that Joe Lieberman knew the obligation that he owed to the world at an early age. He was conscious of the gifts that were given to him by God: intellect, good humor, the ability to see things first before other people saw them. I think he was equally cognizant of the gifts that were given to him by his parents: character, work ethic, a sense of obligation to others. He admitted that the minute that he set floor on the Senate floor when he was an intern for Abe Ribicoff, he knew that he wanted to make his mark there. And few people in our world ended up making a bigger mark than Joe Lieberman. He was a giant to me growing up and entering Connecticut politics. He came to campaign for me when I was a long-shot candidate for the state legislature at age 25 because he believed in mentoring young people who had a kind of vision for the world like he did. For years, my official headshot was a cropped photo of me standing next to Senator Lieberman during that campaign event. You could just see Joe's shoulder in the picture. But I chose that picture because of the transparent joy that was on my face, caused by the thrill of Joe Lieberman coming to campaign for me. It was the best picture anybody had ever taken of me. Others will and have talked about the ways that Joe Lieberman changed the world. Let's be clear, the climate change bill that we passed in 2022 has many fathers, but one is Joe Lieberman, who led on climate before many others were willing. Federal law now protects same-sex marriage. This would not be possible if Joe Lieberman did not push for gay rights when few others were willing. There's not been a 9/11 style attack on this country since that awful day. That's because Joe Lieberman had the courage to lead on reordering America's homeland defense when few others were willing. All of that and more is his legacy. That's the legacy you'll read about in the history books. But there are two equally vital components of what our friend Joe Lieberman leaves us with. The coin of the realm in public life today is authenticity. Americans are just so thirsty for it. They devour it from their leaders. But it's hard to be authentic in this business because there are these molds that you're supposed to be put in: Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, partisan, compromiser. Joe Lieberman was one of the few leaders who were strong enough, who were courageous enough to reject that easy categorization. It often outraged people. How dare you not pick a permanent side? How dare you not stay in one box? I've been asked what I learned from Joe Lieberman. What I learned was to take every idea on its merits, to not discount an idea because it comes from a political adversary, to not unthinkingly adopt an idea because it comes from a political friend. Joe Lieberman decided whether something was good or bad for the country or for the state, regardless of its political origin or impact. When discussing his often talked about decision to observe the Sabbath, he explained that though it caused him to miss many events and it might lose the chance to meet voters, he always believed it won him votes because people respected him for living his beliefs, for doing what he thought was right, for being authentic. The second component of Joe Lieberman's legacy that the history books may not include is one that brings many of us here today: his decency. Scrolling through the email chain over the last few days of his former staffers, and there are just endless testimonies to him from the people who worked for him, who loved him. That word, decent, appears more than any other word in that email chain. But Joe's decency was not passive. It wasn't that he just treated people he worked with respect and kindness. His decency was active. I remember sitting in a friend's office in Danbury, Connecticut, making calls for an hour or so in between events during one of my first campaigns for Congress. I looked up at my friend's bulletin board, and posted on it was a long, detailed, handwritten note from Senator Lieberman. Now, I knew my friend well. I knew that she didn't have a deep personal relationship with the senator. Tellingly, there wasn't much else on that bulletin board. That letter clearly meant a lot to her. What it was a condolence note for the passing of her father some years ago. Joe Lieberman didn't know her more than casually, but he had taken the time to painstakingly detail the parts of this ordinary man's life that would live on. This was one of the most important men in the country, and one day he had just stopped what he was doing. He had penned this beautiful tribute to a man he didn't know and sent it to a young woman he barely knew. That is active, life-altering decency, and that will never show up in the history books. Joe Lieberman set out to change the world that he lived in. He did that. He decided to defy convention and be himself. He did that. He chose to model a kind of grace and kindness and character for others that we don't see in this world often enough. He did that. Joe Lieberman was a giant. He was an original. He was one of one. How lucky for Connecticut that he was one of ours. How lucky we were to have him.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm pleased and honored to have been asked to participate in this gathering this morning to recognize and talk about a wonderful friend, an amazing public servant, a great colleague, a wonderful defender of this great country of ours and his community in Connecticut. So I thank you, Hadassah, and the family for asking me to participate this morning as well. And delighted to be joining the governor and Dick Blumenthal, Chris Murphy, and Mr. Vice President. Welcome to Connecticut, and we're delighted to have you with us. Thank you for being here immensely. So, if you will, Hadassah, again, I deeply appreciate what you're going through, and in many sense, it's asking me to participate in this was a high honor. So, thank you again. Like so many of you who are gathered here today in this congregation, Rabbi Cohen, I thank you for your words and your support during this difficult time. But many of us, and I am one of them, are having a hard time accepting and processing the tragic and sudden passing of my friend Joe Lieberman, my friend for more than half a century. Throughout all those years, regardless of the circumstances or crises, Joe Lieberman always conveyed an inner sense of peace, a balance, a calmness, a quiet serenity about him that I think was a hallmark of many ways in how he conducted his business, how he treated others. He was a person of deep religious faith, as all in this room certainly can testify to, and conviction as well, but never proselytizing, a teacher without tests and quizzes, leading always by his example. And so, Joe and I had served alongside each other in the United States Senate for 22 years. And in all those years together, never was there once, not once, a crossword between us. The staffs of our joint offices always worked together on behalf of the people of Connecticut and the country. In addition to the many days of hard work, there were also some times of good humor. For example, one day years ago, Joe offered me a plan to divide our weekend obligations to local Connecticut events. In the future, my colleague Joe Lieberman recommended that I should be responsible for all community events from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. In short, I became his Shabbos Goy. On the other hand, Joe would assume all the similar responsibilities for me on Sundays. One day I did the math. The Shabbos Goy was responsible for 24 hours, and the new altar boy, Joe Lieberman, was on duty for 4 or 5 hours on Sunday. Joe always had a great staff, wonderful, wonderful people, many of whom are gathered here today as well. And we accomplished a great deal together as a pair, two senators representing the same state. And for those in the room who are familiar enough with the institution, here and several, of course, people are, it was not that common for two senators of the same party in the same state to necessarily have a good, warm relationship. I'll leave it there, if so to speak. But Joe and I always maintained that from day one, all the way through our work together. Honey, I was with you and your parents and your family for your bat mitzvah many years ago. I danced with your father at your wedding here in Stamford as well. He wasn't a bad dancer either, by the way. I only stepped on my toes a few times. And no one, Matt Ewan, had worked with me in my office as well. So this relationship went far beyond a collegial responsibility as two United States senators. It became family in many ways. And so again, I'm deeply honored to be here today to participate in commenting about our laws. I was very excited. Jackie and Grace were born, but no one was more excited than us, than Hadassah and Joe, when Christina and Grace arrived in this world. Anyway, because of political party conventions in Connecticut usually occurred on Saturdays, this Shabbat, I am told that I not only nominated Joe for the Senate on one occasion, but I also gave his acceptance speech. So this went very deep, this relationship, I should understand. As has already been pointed out by Chris and Dick and others, it wasn't sort of arriving in the Senate and then taking on responsibilities. I was always so impressed when Joe was a very young student at Yale University. One of his first forays into politics was as a volunteer for the fight for civil rights, attending the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King and traveling to Mississippi with classmates of his to register African-American voters. You begin to see early on the kind of human being, the person we honor today. As a state legislature, and again, some of this has been mentioned but deserves being repeated, he was the floor leader for our Governor Ella Grassa, going back a long time ago, working to end discrimination against women based on gender or marital status in the 1970s, a half a century ago. And he fought to end discrimination against LGBT community, a fight he continued in the United States Senate, as has been mentioned, working with President Obama to end the military policy of don't ask, don't tell, the continuum of his work here in the state and bring it with him to the United States Senate. When he was Connecticut's Attorney General, he protected consumers, prosecuted polluters, and made sure that divorced women were able to collect child support. He also appointed the first female Deputy Attorney General in Connecticut history, and Clarine is here today and was with Joe and at his side for all these years as well. So the list goes on early on. We have a tendency, I think, to focus on the events most recently, but there's a history with Joe Lieberman, demonstrating from his earliest days a deep commitment to his community, small as it might be as a state senator, that of a United States senator, and beyond, obviously. Above all else, he deeply loved our state and our country. He was truly a patriot. There have been and will be more tributes and remembrances of Joe in the coming weeks and months. The vice president's candidate, the national senator that he was, the foreign policy leader, and the political independent and never backed down, as all of us know, when he believed something was the right thing to do. There are numerous words to accurately describe Joe Lieberman. Some have been mentioned already. Very empathetic, generous, kind, thoughtful, a great politician, warm, funny. But to me, the two words that most aptly and completely capture qualities of my Senate partner were public servant. I don't disagree with Chris Murphy. The sense of decency as well certainly deserves to be mentioned in that term. But public servant. Joe, from the very beginning, regardless of the office that he was in, believed that fundamentally his job was as a public servant. Regardless of titles, regardless of recognition and tributes, you were a public servant. And so I wanted to focus on that if I could. Joe Lieberman had a number of remarkable public titles. State Senator, we've heard, Attorney General, United States Senator, Vice Presidential candidate as well. I don't know what there was in the water in Connecticut that both Joe and I tried to run for president one time. He did far better than I did, I might point out to all of you. In fact, Matt, you worked with me in those campaigns going back in time as well. And in each of these posts or candidacies, Joe Lieberman made significant contributions to his legislative success. His legal skills as our Attorney General in Connecticut, his reputation as a highly respected member of the United States Senate, and as a candidate for the highest public offices in our land. But what makes Joe Lieberman so important and significant was his strict adherence to the underlying purpose of a political life, to never forget, regardless of titles of office, that you are a public servant. It is in a very real sense, Joe's contributions live on. Much of the public commentary on the service of Joe Lieberman over the last several days has focused on his efforts to heal the divisiveness and hyper-partisanship that threaten the foundations of our national democracy. Even with his passing, which is and will always be difficult to understand and accept, there is a continuing opportunity to restore cooperation in which he has been so deeply committed. Because of his example, because of what he did and how he conducted his life during his years of public service, recognizing that compromise, cooperation, and bipartisanship are essential, absolutely essential, to sustaining our democracy. Even though he is no longer with us, his message and his example will carry on, in my view. I believe Joe's legacy will be absolutely to contribute to the reducing of the polarization and bitterness that is so contaminated our national conversation over these last few decades. As a committed public servant, Joe managed to articulate his strong convictions with a moderate, thoughtful, persuasive language and style. His determination to reach workable compromises on domestic and foreign policy issues was further evidence, of his strength. And so, on this day here, when we gather to pay tribute and to recognize his contributions, I believe because he was so widely respected by his colleagues, regardless of political party, Joe Lieberman consistently made a difference and will continue for years and years to come. And even though we've lost him this week, his determined commitment to bring us together as Americans, regardless of our differences, remains alive and well because of what he championed during those years. And so we will miss him terribly as a human being, as a father, as a grandfather. All of those relationships that are recognized and seen in this room. But let it be clearly felt today as we leave this synagogue, this chamber, this congregation. The words of Joe Lieberman, the work of my friend and colleague, will live on for decades and decades to come. Thank you all for listening.
Hadassah, Hani, Matt, Rebecca, Ethan, to Joe's sisters, Rietta and Ellen, to all of the grandchildren, and to all of those who are grieving Joe's loss, to the distinguished elected officials. I think virtually every elected official in Connecticut is here, and many former members of the House and Senate. My friend Bill Bradley is here, so many others, all to honor Joe, because we're bound together today in sadness, but also in joy, because we have witnessed a life as rich as Joe's. Rich in faith, kindness, as mentioned, decency, principle, and so many great achievements for his nation and for this state. I'm not on the program because I didn't know until midnight that I was going to speak today. Thank you, Matt. And in fairness, the family didn't know I was going to use Matt's phrase, schlep up here from Tennessee until I got on the Delta flight in Nashville last night. You have short nights here in Stamford. Of Joe, we can say of him the very best we can say of any man. His was a life of constant consequence for his family, his friends, his nation. But I am standing here to tell a different story of praise. Joe was my dear friend. I knew him before he came to the Senate when he was Attorney General here in this state. I had always admired him in the Senate. We stood together on so many issues, sometimes in a small minority. He and I were among the only Democratic senators to support George H.W. Bush's decision to go into Iraq to force Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And I felt personally some of what Joe came to feel later in his career. We were close on climate, on civil rights, human rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and so many other issues. And so that closeness was formed before I chose him to be my running mate in 2000, but then our relationship and that between our families became extraordinarily close, a very significant relationship. We laughed together, fought like hell together for what we wanted our country to be, prayed together, thought for a season we had won together, but, well, you know that part of the story. You win some, you lose some, and then there's that little-known third category. But all of it drew us very, very close together. On Saturdays, during the long, excruciating 36-day process after Election Day and before the Supreme Court decision, Joe would walk over to the Vice President's residence at the Naval Observatory to observe the stars, but to observe the Sabbath together, and it was a time of real comfort and perspective. On one occasion, I walked all the way back to his home with him, and then back to the observatory. We debated, by the way, the merits of Sabbatarianism, which has had its adherents in my faith tradition in times past and should perhaps be restored. But Joe and I went our separate ways after 2000. I wish I could say this with as much humor as Ned did when you relieved him of that burden of being a Democrat in name. Joe and I had some deep and sometimes bitter disagreements on policy and political matters. No matter how hard I tried or how hard Joe tried, we could not convince the other of the merit of our positions. And those of you who have had arguments with Joe know exactly what I'm talking about. I, for one, was tempted to anger at times, frustrated at Joe's stubbornness and disappointed that he was taking a path that I thought was wrong. And I know his disappointment in my turning away from him was surely just as profound. So there the story could have ended, and if it had, we would have reached a dead end in a once loving and fruitful friendship. But that would have been an unfortunate example of something else as well, something bigger than me or Joe. It would have been a dead end of a kind that is so familiar in the politics of America today. A dead end with ideological cul-de-sacs and ruined possibilities of anger and retreat. But it did not end there. We had another turn. Both of us knew deep down that the strong foundation of our friendship and what we shared in common was so much larger and so much stronger than what was driving us apart in those years. Sooner or later, those of us who are fortunate enough to survive begin to lose precious friendships faster than we can form them. It's why we have to work to recognize their value in the moment. Always preserve them, and if they are temporarily lost, work to reclaim them. Joe had that wisdom. Politics can be a rough trade. As a recovering politician, I can certainly testify to that. The stakes are high, the pressures are great. Joe and I experienced those. But he always knew, beyond doubt, the true value of things. I saw him ready to reclaim friendships that had been seared by disagreements, ready to look for ways to bridge divisions, ready to seek reconciliation, ready to stand for his principles, always, even when that independence left him exposed to partisan anger from both sides. We are, all of us here and now, living through a time when that kind of willingness to disagree without disrespect, to debate without seeking to destroy, has become for many harder to find. Some say that as a nation we have not experienced anything like our current civic rancor since the years leading up to the Civil War. Lincoln famously said, "The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country." Thraldom, I'm told, is an ancient Scandinavian word describing a form of voluntary slavery. Too many in these times have voluntarily become adherents to beliefs that divide us. The famous rabbit holes on the internet have slippery sides that lead people down to the echo chamber. And spending long enough in the echo chamber induces a new form of AI, artificial insanity. I mean it not merely as a humorous line. I mean to reference QAnon, election denial, climate denial, even the resurgence of the Flat Earth Society, if you can believe that. And this is a form of rancor that has the potential for dividing our country, but we have also a strong foundation and common beliefs and values that are stronger than what is dividing us. Democracy is a learning process, and I believe there is wisdom in the American people, enough that we will pass through our present difficulties, aided by an underlying faith in the enduring value of the unity that we can find in friendship and loyalty to one another. Those of us who had the privilege of knowing Joe Lieberman share that knowledge through the example he set as a man and as a public servant. I learned a few words of Yiddish from him, but Ned Lamont beat me to the word mensch. There is no English equivalent for that word, Ned, which is why the English language has claimed it as one of its own. But those who seek its definition will not find it in dictionaries so much as they find it in the way Joe Lieberman lived his life. Friendship over anger, reconciliation as a form of grace. We can learn from Joe Lieberman's life some critical lessons about how we might heal the rancor in our nation today. As in so many other times of trouble, we can look back to our founders. Adams and Jefferson were partners in the extraordinary enterprise of launching the United States of America. In fact, they served together on the small committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence, along with a representative from Connecticut, Roger Sherman. Then, of course, Adams became our second president and Jefferson our third, but the election of 1800, in which they campaigned against one another and in which Jefferson prevailed, led to a long feeling of bitterness and even betrayal between the two former friends. But time is a powerful medicine, and after many years had lapsed, Adams wrote to Jefferson to say, "You and I ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other." What followed was the most extraordinary correspondence in American history, as these two men unburdened themselves of the rancor they had felt toward one another and returned to their love of country and of family, and to honor the friendship they had formed. In March of 1826, as they each were nearing the end, Jefferson wrote to Adams to ask if he might grant a request and allow Jefferson's grandson to visit Adams. As he put it about his grandson, he wishes to be able, in the winter nights of old age, to recount to those around him what he has heard and learnt of the heroic age preceding his birth. Famously, they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the document they had, in a sense, co-written. Jefferson wrote most of it. Adams made particularly important contributions, and Roger Sherman did as well, Connecticut's representative, who died earlier in 1793. Sherman was eulogized in this state by one of Connecticut's leading ministers, one of the most famous in American history, Jonathan Edwards, Jr. I want to close with his words from that eulogy, which have lost none of their meaning as we remember Joe Lieberman. To have sustained so many and so important public offices, and to have uniformly sustained them with honor and reputation, to have maintained an amiable character in every private relation, to have been an ornament to his faith, and to have died in a good old age, in the full possession of all his honors and of his powers, both of body and mind, is a very rare attainment and a very happy juncture of circumstances. The loss is great to our whole country, the United States, for he was still capable of eminent usefulness. It is great to this state It is great to this city, of which he was the first magistrate. It is still greater to this society, of which he was so amiable, eminent, and useful a member. But it is greatest of all to his family.
We'll now hear tributes from Senator Joe's family, Connie, followed by Rabbi Ethan Tucker, Rebecca, and then Matthew.
Please just confirm that you can hear me, because I'm a different height than all the other speakers. Daddy, as I approach Riverdale on Wednesday evening, I expected you and Mommy to be waiting in the lobby of your apartment building with a smile on your face, helping me schlep the stroller and bags with the energy of a 65-year-old and not an 82-year-old. I am your Bat Sukunim, the daughter that you and Mommy had when you were 46 years old. But this time it was different. In recent years and months, I davened, I prayed for your life to be very long. I beseeched Hashem, please God, give my father many more years. Let him see all of my kids' bar mitzvahs, their weddings, his great-grandchildren. Please give him this time, because he has so much more Kiddush Hashem to bring into this world, so much more sanctification of God's name, so much more energy to do good. But Hashem had other plans. God had other plans. This is what God wanted, and although you were 82, we all feel that you were ripped away from us at a much younger age. You are Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous, like the biblical Joseph. Mommy and I always said that you were like a chassid, a pious, righteous man. You had emunah pshuta, simple faith in Hashem and God and the Torah and mitzvot. I got some of this emunah, this pure faith from you. You often described yourself, even in recent years, as just a simple boy from Stanford. Even with your stature and all of your life experiences, you were so humble, and anyone who interacted with you felt this. How befitting that your levaya is here, your funeral is here in Stanford, a community that your family was so rooted in. Your mother and father and your grandmothers were known not because they were rich or fancy or famous people. They were known because of their many acts of chesed, their work with the mikvah, their kindness, and their volunteer work in the community. They were known because of their quiet help to individuals who needed it, and because of their wise counsel. You accomplished a tremendous amount on an international scale for the greater good of the world. You sanctified God's name. You were Makadi Shem Shemayim at an unparalleled level. The mitzvah of Shabbos was very dear to you, and you walked 5 miles when you needed to get to or from the capital. You missed events because of Shabbos, but you never felt that it was really a missed opportunity. As many have said, you were literally a walking Kiddush Hashem. You were literally someone who was sanctifying God's name by everything he did. Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous of our time. And while it would make sense that your vast accomplishments could easily make you intimidating and difficult to approach, the reality could not have been further from the truth. This was one of your many gifts. Your accomplishments on the global scale were so awesome, but somehow so too were your one-on-one interactions with everyone. And I mean every single person you interacted with. The Capitol Police, the doormen, waiters, people from the neighborhood. Everyone knew they would be received with a warm smile and often accompanied by their name. Your memory for names was astounding. And a question about their family. Everyone left your presence feeling encouraged, feeling happier and better. This wasn't done to receive anything in return. It was done because you genuinely cared about every person you interacted with. You saw that Tselem Elohim, that everyone is created in God's image. This was felt at home as well. There was no nasty private life to hide. There was only care and love. You were the best husband and father and grandfather. I am so thankful that Hashem, that God chose you and Mommy to be my parents. I am happy that I was able to give you some nachas. The days and months and years ahead will certainly feel as if there is a gaping hole without you with us physically in this world. Who will walk Shlomo to preschool? This is one of my dad's favorite things to do. He would walk my youngest boy, I have a younger girl, but my youngest boy and my other boy, Avram Shmuel, he would walk them to and from their preschool. It was about like a block or two away, depending where we lived, and it was his favorite thing to do. Who will be there to dance at upcoming bar mitzvahs? Thank God my father was at my son Akiva's bar mitzvah, which was 6 weeks ago, and at the end of it, before he left to go to Germany, because there was a conference he went to every year in Germany, that some of you may have been there with him, he said to me, this was one of the best Shabbases of my entire life. Who will do the late night grocery store runs with us in our neighborhood in Jerusalem? My dad's energy was it was just insane. It was on a different level. He would love to go out and do the little shopping, and wherever we lived, the people at the local little store knew him. Who will be that voice of truth and integrity that the world so needs? And the list goes on and on. The collective pain is overwhelming, but we all know that you, the modern day Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous, you would not want us to freeze, to be depressed. You followed in the way of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, constantly on a mission in this world, the Takin Olam B'Malchut Shakai, to do Tikkun Olam, to fix this world. You are on Shlichus, you are on a mission. We will continue the Shlichus, this mission. We will be strong, and we'll find sources of strength we never knew we had. We will take care of Mommy, who had the most incredible relationship with you. There was and is so much love between you and her. We will build generations of God-fearing, upright Jews that look back to you for inspiration of everything that is good and right, of everything that brings us close to God. Well, Hashem decided that it was time for you to pass away. Your neshama, your soul, may have left this world and gone up to Shemayim, to the heavens. But your soul is also eternal, and the lessons you pass down to us of kindness, of integrity, of positivity, of righteousness will live on forever in our family and all those who choose to learn from you. I came a little bit earlier. I got in on Wednesday evening, and thank God my husband Daniel and our 5 boys, I came with my baby. My husband Daniel and our 5 boys were able to get in last night. And my youngest boy was 4 years old. I want to see Papi and Safta. I want to see Papi and Safta. And we started to explain to him, Papi's neshama, his soul left his body and it went up to Shemayim. And you're not going to see Papi again. And he responded right away and he said, but I'll see him when Mashiach comes. I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing at his response. I found his response to be unbelievable. He said, when the redemption comes, when there's what we call the resurrection of the dead, he'll see him again. And he was so sure of that. And so I daven, Daddy, you should be a Melitz Yosher. You should pray for all of us, for peace in this world, for good things, for health. That very, very soon we should merit the redemption.
How do we live a life of principle and integrity without closing ourselves off from others who don't share all of our values? How do we build bridges and broad tents that include the diversity of human viewpoints and experiences without forgetting what we stand for. It's an old problem and an evergreen one. The Talmud records a crisis from 2,000 years ago when Rabban Gamliel, the political head of the Jewish community, was deposed as the leader of the main rabbinic academy. What was his sin? His standards were too high. Rabban Gamliel demanded that all who entered the house of study meet the standard of toho kivaro, that their insides should be like their outsides. Like the ark and the tabernacle, mibayit u'michutz tetzapenu, a scholar was meant to be a person of gilded character, inside and out, a paragon of integrity and principle. And in fact, we're told that on the day when Rabban Gamliel was deposed, the barriers to entry were lowered dramatically. Hundreds and hundreds of pews were added until the space was bursting at the seams. So the message of the Talmud at first read seems to be this: lean into love and compassion and be less of a stickler. Sacrifice some integrity and principle. Maybe it's okay for the ark to be gilded on the outside without looking too closely at what you'll find within. You'll be rewarded with a fuller and broader community. And if you stand on ceremony for what you believe, your world will begin to contract. But that's not actually the end of the story, because at the end of the story, Rabban Gamliel, presumably along with the culture he embodied, returns to head up the study house 3 weeks out of 4. And so the final picture in the Talmud is one of synthesis, where the communal space is guided by a paragon of principle, insisting on high standards, balanced with a breadth of vision that will find a way to let those hundreds of people in. In the Talmud, that balance requires a rotating cast of characters. For all of us mourning here today, we saw this synthesis and the utter refutation of the entire dichotomy in the man we mourn today. Joe was toho kivaro. His inside was like his outside. Toho kivaro. His inner gilded character and generosity shone through to all those who encountered him. His sever panim yafot, his gleaming countenance, was not a well-executed politeness. It reflected the inner joy he truly felt when he encountered each person. As you heard my sister say, there was no person, no matter their station, their seniority, their origin, their ideology, who was not capable of evoking this response from him. When he first met me at the age of 6.5, I could tell from the first moment that he loved my mother, but he also loved me, and not just because he loved her. His external kindness reflected internal affection. That was a gift, gratitude for which I can never exhaust, an example I can only hope to emulate. Toho kivaro, his integrity guided his actions. Nothing was done except for principle, sometimes to his political benefit, sometimes not. You knew where he stood, and based on where he stood, you knew how he would respond. Toho kivaro, his inner private family life was seamlessly connected to his outward public-facing life. He was the same person at home and in public. He saw his public service as a reflection of his most deeply held values, the ones he instilled in us. And his interactions with everyone carried the tenderness of a dear friend and a loving parent. You all know that's why you're here today. He would have been a star pupil in Rabban Gamliel's academy. But no one knew more and better how to build bridges and broad tents than he. And he did so through his integrity, not despite it. It started at home. I saw it as a young child when he leveraged his own commitment as a father, his love for Matt and Rebecca, and leveraged that to bring me on as a child as well. In Jewish life, he had his home synagogue, starting with this one, but there was no shul in which he wouldn't daven. He saw and found truth in genuinely held political convictions with which he disagreed because he knew what it felt like to believe in something. His faith allowed him to connect to others of faith or to anyone seeking a voice of conviction and principle. He taught me that being an observant Jew should make you more, not less likely, to connect with those of different backgrounds. His integrity was not a blinding light. It was a magnetic field, drawing in fellow travelers and inviting in even adversaries for dialogue and compromise. There was no limit to the number of benches in his study hall. He could have run the Talmudic Academy 4 weeks out of 4. It would have modeled integrity inside and out, and it would have been bursting at the seams, as this space is today. Oh, how we miss you and need you. Thank you for reminding us that our deepest convictions can be the most important planks of bridge building, and that the pegs of our integrity are the only things strong enough to anchor the tents of the broad communities our world so desperately needs. We love you.
Last night, as I did just about everything possible to avoid writing this eulogy, I could hear my dad's voice saying, "Just sit down and do it. Just plug away at it." And I don't want to say what he would have said if he saw me eating all of the Cadbury mini eggs leading up to mine. But I so did not want to write this particular speech, and it seems impossible that I have to. Our dad was so vital and engaged with his many jobs, his friends, and our family. But here we are, and I did just plug away at it, really empowered by him and his love. Looking at the photos and clips of my dad that have appeared these past 48 hours, I am struck by the light that he brought to the world. The literal sparkle in his eyes and the megawatt smile that transformed his craggy face into a gift. You wanted to cause that smile and bask in its light. He strengthened us with his light, which in part was about optimism, a belief that things would work out, that people could be their best selves, that you, his daughter, his friend, his colleague, his employee, had greatness in you and would find it. Nothing felt better than knowing he believed in you. His light was also about gratitude. He was deeply grateful for the life he lived, for the wonders he encountered each day, for the exceptional events he experienced, and for the people he knew. He never became jaded or took things for granted, whether it was a good cup of coffee, the flanken pea soup from Seasons in Scarsdale, a delicious muffin from Moss Cafe, a trip to Italy with Safta, a Munich security conference, his grandchildren, or his great love, Hadassah. Of course, he valued these things differently, but he actively appreciated, really savored all of them. This gratitude sent out ripples like a pebble dropped into a pond, making those of us lucky enough to be in his orbit want to do better, to see how he saw, to be more generous and present in our own lives. That light was also about taking joy in people, as many of us have talked about. He loved hearing people's stories, finding out where they were from, what they did, learning about and from their experiences. He valued us. His 4-year-old grandchild, his daughter, his son-in-law, his legislative aide, his neighbors. He wanted to hear what we had to say and seemed genuinely interested. This felt like a light shining on us, too. I was hugely blessed to grow up in that light and to get regular boosters of his reassurance, belief, and love. And over the last 48 hours, I've learned how deeply he touched so many people. Our family's heartbreak is widely shared. What makes this all astonishing, really, is that our dad was not Mr. Rogers, but a brilliant, savvy, and accomplished leader, a man who could have done anything and chose to use his considerable gifts to serve our country, this state, really all of us in this room, and beyond the borders of our country. He did it his way, over and over again, with a rare mixture of grace and determination that made difficult things seem easy. So much so that one could miss the exceptional nature of what he was doing. But he was exceptional, and our country mourns his passing, particularly now when his style of leadership is badly needed and in such short supply. Although our dad left us suddenly, with no last conversations and blessings, we know what he wants for us and from us. He showed us in how he spent his time, in how he moved through the world, in the things he chose to devote his considerable talents to, and in his willingness to speak with moral clarity and stand up for ideas he knew to be true, right, and important, regardless of their popularity. Well, we won't be able to turn to him for guidance, which I really can't imagine. It just feels wrong. He has made what matters and how to live very, very clear. He left us far too soon, but he gave us this great gift, which I will strive every day of my life to be worthy of, and I hope others will too.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. You've truly filled our hearts. The expressions, all of the expressions of love that we all have received since Wednesday evening have told us that we're not alone. And let me tell you, it's an entirely good, though sometimes tear-jerking feeling. Like my dad, most of us Liebermaniacs aren't the loudest political voices typically, but it's been great to hear all of those voices the last couple of days. So thank you all very, very much. Maybe Judaism's most towering and enduring scholar is the 12th and 13th century Rabbi Moses Maimonides, also known as the Rambam. Inscribed on his grave in Tiberias in Israel are these words: "From Moses to Moses, there was none like Moses." The reference, of course, is to the biblical Moses, the great leader and teacher of the Israelites.
You've heard reference to the biblical Joseph already today, and I want to refer to him again. In all humility, but with great love, I say that from Joseph to Joseph, there was none like Joseph. My dad, like Joseph, stood astride many worlds: the Jewish world, the secular world, the political world, the religious world, America, Israel, the United States, and Europe, our family home, and the public square. So, who else could have chanted the Haftorah at synagogue on a Saturday morning, and that Saturday night sung My Way in front of hundreds of people at the St. Mary Magdalene Festival on Worcester Street in New Haven? Who else has written books about hardball political icons like John Bailey and Ella Grasso, and also written books describing the observance and meaning of Shabbat and the festival of Shavuot? Who else is so at home and at ease and respected amongst stalwart evangelicals and stalwart supporters of choice and LGBTQ rights? Who else could run against George W. Bush twice, in 2000 and 2004, then get warmly but involuntarily kissed by him in 2005, and nearly have that derail his entire political career? Who else could run for Senate in 2006, as the Democrat he is, lose the Democratic primary, and still get reelected with a majority of the vote that same year, but as an independent? That question has a factual answer. No one. No one else in the 235-year history of the United States Senate has done that. Excuse me and indulge me if most of you don't recognize some of these old New Haven and Connecticut names I'm about to mention, but my dad's life had a range. From Arthur Barberi to Al Gore. From Bill O'Neill to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. From Biagio DeLito to Bibi Netanyahu. From Vinnie Morrow to Václav Havel. From Billy Carroll to Bo Derek. And from Jimmy O'Connell to John McCain. Is that a range or what? And as my dad famously asked upon his acceptance of the Democratic nomination for vice president, is America a great country or what? It is a great country, and my dad loved it. He loved living in it. He loved serving it. He loved standing up and fighting for his fellow citizens. In remembering our dad, people have shared over and over again stories of his kindness to them, at hard times, but also all the time. Stories of his integrity, stories of his political courage. All of these stories are true, and true reflections of who he was. The person you knew was the same person we all knew. Like Etan said, what you saw, Etan said in the Talmudic version of this, what you saw is what you got. He gets a ton of credit for being kind and being honest and being courageous and unafraid. He deserves all of it. But the funny thing is, it was easy for him. It came natural. It would have been harder for him to be the other way, to be harsh or mean or false or weak. He was blessed by God and by a good upbringing to be the great and decent guy, the supreme mensch that he was
down to the bone. He was blessed, and he was a blessing for all of us. Somehow, despite all of this, a solid slice of people developed a hate for him. So I'd say to those who have a hate for him, he never hated you or even had ill will towards you. He knew it was all part of public life today, and he didn't take it personally. He would urge you, I'm confident, to stay strong for what you believe, but to try to save yourself all the energy that you're putting into that hate, because it's a waste for you. We're not the Hatfields and McCoys here. We're Americans. We're fellow citizens in the greatest country in the history of the world. We're all humans, and we're all we've got. Finally, Hadassah, you two have been everything to each other, and your love inspired everyone around you. I want to share a kind of unauthorized note from him to you, and I've edited it, but he was at the Munich Security Conference a bit over a month ago. He'd been feeling a bit sick and messaged you this at the end of a long day. Except it was such a long day that instead of sending it to you directly on WhatsApp, he sent it to our family WhatsApp group. And again, I've edited a little, but here's what he said. It was nothing that bad. I mean, it's Joe Lieberman we're talking about. But here's what he said. Back in room, McCain Award to 2 graduate students, dinner with senators, and stopped by at Cindy McCain's after party and drank herbal tea with an exclamation point he had. Long, good day, moving cautiously, feeling good, love you madly. You celebrated 41 years together last week. You had a great romance, a bedrock strong marriage, and a wonderful life together. We know you lost your other half. We all love you. We're all here for you. And as we feel our own pain, we feel yours as well. So, as we read at the end of each book of the Torah, Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek. Let us be strong, and let us strengthen others as well. Thank you.
We have heard stirring tributes to Senator Joseph Lieberman this morning from his family, whom he loves so dearly, Senators Blumenthal, Murphy, and Dodd, Governor Lamont, Vice President Al Gore, a spectrum of people reflecting on his personal and public personas. And to the Senator's everlasting credit and our benefit, the personas are one. As Etan and the family shared, one of the greatest accolades for a human being is that their inside is like their outside. Senator Joe walked with dignity, grace, faith, courage, honesty, kindness, and love, with an effervescent smile in all spheres of life, whether as a husband, father, brother, grandfather, statesman, senator, friend to all, and stranger to no one. I want to begin a brief reflection by offering a prayer. Judaism teaches us that Senator Joe's soul is very much present this morning. He is here. The body is only a vessel, but the soul is eternal. No matter how much we say about Senator Joseph Lieberman, it will never be enough to capture the fact that he was an angel among men. Yet the greatest honor that we can pay him is not in words alone, but in deeds. When we leave today, will we have been transformed in some way by the life and legacy of Senator Joseph Lieberman? His soul is like a flame this morning, and we are fueling his light. I pray that when we rise in a number of minutes, we can rise not only in body, but in spirit. I pray that the words we hear this morning and that I'm about to share, which come from the heart, enters yours. And the legacy of Senator Lieberman will leave an indelible impact on us personally and as a nation. I am speaking this morning on behalf of our beloved shul, Agudas Shalom, the city of Stamford, the Jewish people, and the citizens of our country. I am not a family member, nor an elected official, but his rabbi, one of many, and a friend of Senator Joe, a remarkable human being. He was one of the rarest souls who is so universally and deeply admired and loved. He was born in Stamford in 1942 to his beloved parents, Marcia and Henry, whom he loved and admired so deeply. He had his bar mitzvah at Agudat Shalom, attended Stamford High, and then Yale, but throughout his life, he did not lose sight of his spirit. He was not fully of this world. He never wavered from the mission for which God sent his holy soul to this earth. All the accolades we are hearing from his family, friends, politicians, world leaders, and humanity from every walk of life, a reflection of the fact that he never confused his role with his soul. He was endowed with a divine spark, like all of us, and to his everlasting credit and our eternal benefit, he lived with a higher purpose and walked this world with humility and grace. Leading with your soul and not your body, as Senator Joe did, is life's greatest challenge. But the rewards are enormous. When we do not simply exist, but seek to live with transcendence, joy, courage, love, kindness, and purpose, our souls are on fire. And Joe Lieberman lived this life in spades. He shared with me a number of years ago, and today I believe he speaks to all of us. He wrote, "Navigating life with clarity of purpose is not easy, but the rewards for leading a life of legacy are enormous. Imagine for a moment if we lived our lives with the awareness of the eternal resonance of our words. Imagine if we harnessed all of our potential every day to improve ourselves, our families, our community, and the world. Leading our lives in tune with this higher calling would infuse our nation with greater civility, unity, happiness, honesty, and realized personal potential. As Senator Lieberman ascends to heaven, we believe that God will ask him 4 questions. And these are the 4 questions that God will ask each and every one of us. It is a litmus test for leading a life of legacy. The first question God will ask all of us is whether we are devoted to family. The second question is whether we are devoted to our faith. The third question is whether we are people of honesty and integrity. And the final question is whether we never lost faith in the possibility of making the world a better and brighter place. And Senator Lieberman can answer these questions in the most profound ways. I will ask the questions, and I ask everyone to answer amen. Was Senator Lieberman, were you devoted to family? We can all say. Amen. The second question, was he devoted to his faith? And we can all say. Amen. The third question is whether he was devoted to honesty and integrity, and we can answer. Amen. And the final question, when God asks him, did you never lose faith in the possibility of making the world a better and brighter place, we can all answer. Amen. And his name, which reflects the essence of his soul, served as a navigational guide for his life. As has been shared, he was named Joseph, which was reminiscent, I learned, not only of his grandfather, Joseph, but also of the biblical figure. As the biblical Joseph, Senator Lieberman was a man of deep faith. According to Jewish mysticism, Joseph composed the words of Psalm 23. Although I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. And Senator Joe shared with me in one of our conversations that his prayers in the morning, afternoon, and evening anchored him throughout the day. Rather than ask, what do I want? Senator Joe asked as often as he could, what does God want of me? As a man of faith, he fortified our community and people of all faiths to stay true to tradition while embracing modernity. I have heard story after story of how his presence inspires generations of Jews. He was and is a hero. He was and is the embodiment of a walking Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, and he lifted us all. Senator Lieberman served as the commencement speaker at my college graduation, when the president, Rabbi R.E. Berman, is here at Yeshiva University. And most recently, the university announced the establishment of the Senator Joseph Lieberman Mitzner Center, who's here as well for public service and advocacy, whose goal is to empower the next generation of government leaders and public advocates who are deeply rooted in Jewish values and tradition. Even a wink from Joe made a difference. A recent visitor to Stanford told me, I will never forget, when I was at a rally for Senator Lieberman when he was running for vice president, I was the only person in the audience with a yarmulke. And I caught the senator's eye, and he winked at me. It was a gesture of affirmation of my Judaism that was unforgettable. Walking to the White House on Shabbos for a vote, observing kashrut, wearing his yarmulke, is nothing short of the embodiment of the Abrahamic mission, not to isolate, but to elevate our world. Secondly, like his namesake, Senator Lieberman was a man of deep principles. He lived by the motto of Aristides de Sousa Mendes, a Portuguese diplomat who risked his own life to save the lives of thousands of Jewish refugees during the Holocaust. And he said, I would rather stand with God against man than man against God. And Senator Lieberman drew his strength by emulating the biblical Joseph. He made God his co-pilot, answering thank God when asked how he was doing, and God willing when asked about his plans. In a world increasingly devoid of faith and infused with moral relativism, Senator Lieberman's own words must serve as a guiding light for all of us. Now more than ever, he would not cower in the face of pressure, but speak strongly of the unbreakable bond between America and Israel and our shared values. When reflecting on his choices, he shared, "When I decide on a course of action, it is not for fear of failure. If I lose because I stood for my beliefs, I will always be at peace. I never want to be remembered," he wrote, "for playing life safe. I want to be remembered for doing what was right." And thirdly, like the biblical Joseph, Joe saw the face of God in another human being. He understood that with a few words, we may not be able to change the world, but we can change the world of one person. When the biblical Joseph chooses not to lament his fate while in the dungeon, but turns to the butler and the baker and asks how they were doing, he changes his destiny and the future of the Jewish people. I would venture that anyone here who spent any time with the senator felt that he was your friend. Raise your hands if you felt he was your friend. He would pray in this building. He would drink scotch in this building. He would enjoy a good kiddush, offer advice, mentorship, and simply listen and say hello. He was truly a stranger to no one. He saw the divine in everyone he met, regardless of background, faith, or political opinion. He walked with humility. And he drew his inspiration from his faith, which describes the greatest intellectual adversaries, Hillel and Shammai, who battled it out in the Talmud, yet whose children married each other. We are all here today, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, to honor a man who believed in the unifying values and vision of our country. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, legacy starts and ends with family. Joe, first and foremost, placed family at the center of his universe, as we heard so movingly from Matt, Rebecca, Etan, and Chani. And Hadassah, our hearts are with you. Your love of Joe and his of you is eternal, and we are all embracing you and wishing you so much strength and comfort. And he loved his sisters, Rieta and Ellen, who shared his love in return. But in one of the most poignant scenes in Genesis, the biblical Joseph merits not only to raise his children, but his grandchildren. Joe saw and knew his grandchildren. Each and every one of you, Nessia and Willie, Maddie and Camilla, Aiden, Yitzchak and Yoav, Akiva, Binyamin, Meir, Abraham, Shmuel, Shlomo, and Nava Elka. Did I get them all? Are tasked with carrying your grandfather's legacy forward. But what you may not realize is that he was tasked by his grandmother to do the same. When speaking with Senator Lieberman about his life, he told me that when he was at Yale, he struggled with remaining an observant Jew. But when his grandmother died, this is what he told me. I experienced a feeling that now that she was gone, the chain in Jewish history was no longer there, and that I now had a choice to put myself in the chain and be part of the future. I was compelled to return. In this spirit, as Joe physically leaves this earth, we are compelled to put ourselves in the chain and to be part of the future. The void in our community, our city, our country, Israel, and the world is deep. Yet we can amplify Senator Lieberman's light and be part of a better future. Let us not leave today only saying we were at the funeral of a remarkable human being. Let us pause and recommit to his values. Our lives matter. Joe believed his life, the imprint of his soul on earth, mattered. I like what the vice president had said. He lived with constant consequence. And God willing, if we refortify our commitment to the values of family, faith, Israel, courage, coupled with a willingness to take, as he did, the road less traveled, and seeing the face of God in every human being, as Joe did, we will all make a difference and merit a time soon of greater unity, peace, humility, and inspired living. On behalf of everyone here in person and virtually around the world, we say to you, Joe, thank you for being our friend, mentor, and muse. Thank you for being a champion of faith, fortitude, and civility. Thank you for being an independent thinker whose humility and commitment challenges us all. You are a voice of moderation and reason which we need now more than ever. Your legacy to perfect the world as God's partner will be recorded in the annals of American and Jewish history and on high. May the memory of Senator Joseph Isidore Lieberman, Yosef Yisrael Ben Hanan, be a blessing always. Now I'd like to ask everyone to please rise for the Kel Malay Memorial Prayer. We honor Chazan Shim Kramer.
Hey, Lamolei Rachami, Shoichein Bamaroni, Amatzei Menuchana Chano, Ala Kanafei Hashechino, B'malos, Kinoi Shimatoiri, Kizova Horakia, Masiri, Es Nishmas, Yosef Yisrael, Ben Hanan, Umasher, Sholach Mi Olamo, Babu, Shenachnu Mispanalim, Yad Haskonas Nishmoso, Begane Yedem, Tehei Menuchaso, Lochein Malarachamim, Yahastirehu, V'seisek Nofov, Li'olamim, V'yitzro mitzro, Achayim, Es nishmo so, Harinoi unachaloso, V'yonuach b'sholom al mishkavu. V'noimar Amen.
God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose in the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure. who shine as the brightness of the firmament to the soul of Joseph Lieberman, who is God to his world, and through his memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen. We ask the individuals who have been honored to serve as pallbearers to come forward. The family will be going out and then to the left on Strawberry Hill. We ask everyone else to follow through towards the lobby when exiting the building. The funeral will continue at the Agudah Shalom Cemetery near West Hill High School.